About a year and a half ago, I started competing with the NX8 1-8, and since then I've competed in about 5 or 6 different tactical games competitions with it. The reason I started with the NX8 is I had the idea that I would be switching over to the AtacR and likely only going back over to the NX8 if like my primary gun went down and I needed to use a backup gun, or maybe put it on a practice gun that I beat up a little bit. However, that's when I learned a little bit more about the company, about their different lines of optics, which brings me around to the first thing that I get asked a lot, which is what is the difference in the AtacR and the NX8? So the first thing to help kind of describe the differences in these two is kind of the difference between how Nightforce lines their optics out and how most products company line their product lines out. So like just like archery, just like optics, there's typically a flagship or premium level of product, and then down from there you get more economical lines where you give up things like optical clarity, eye box, field of view, reticle choice, different things. However, it is a more economical line, so it's putting in a decent scope at a decent price. That is what I believed the difference between these two scopes were. However, after using it, the NX8 for a year and a half, doing a little bit of research, learning about the company, learning about these two different lines of scopes, is when I learned that I was very wrong about that. So these two lines of scopes are both premium optics. However, they are intended for two different things. This scope is lighter, it's smaller, it's more nimble. This scope is a little bit larger, it's a little bit heavier, it's a little bit beefier. A lot of people describe this thing as a tank. That doesn't mean that this is a fragile optic. I have completely beat this thing up for a year and a half, and I have not lost zero, haven't had any zero creep, and the optics mount has been great as well. The other thing that is really cool about the Nightforce lines of optics is that the reticles are available in both scopes. So if I'm going to put one of these scopes on a hunting rifle, one of these scopes on a competition rifle, or maybe one scope on a backup gun, one scope on a primary gun, I can have the same reticle in both. Where that's important is in competition, if you're practicing with a backup gun that has maybe like a more value type scope on it, you're going to have to get back used to using your primary scope again, or if you're switching over hunting, you're going to have to get used to seeing another reticle again. Whereas if you're using a gun with similar ballistics, you can have the same reticle, have the same holds, or roughly the same holds, and you're not going to be looking at a different sight picture every time you're going to shoot. The quality of the glass in both of these scopes is the same. Where you can tell a little bit of difference is in the picture of the AtacR. The geometry of this scope lends itself to being able to express the quality of the glass a little bit better. So you will see a little bit of a difference between these two. If you're going from looking into one, looking into the other, looking into one, looking to the other, you will be able to see a little bit of difference. However, if you're looking through them a couple of minutes apart or on different days, you're not going to be able to see a difference in the picture. When I first started shooting these scopes, I would have told you that the AtacR had a bigger field of view. Ends up it's the opposite. So the NX8 actually has a bigger field of view. I believe the reason why I had that perception is that the eye box in the AtacR is huge. So I'm able to move my head around on the back of the scope quite a bit, and I can still see the entire field of view while my head is moving around in different positions. Whereas because of the smaller dimensions of the scope, you have to give up a little bit somewhere. Where you give up a little bit of stuff is in the eye box. So the eye box is comparable to any other high quality LPVO on the market, but it is not a huge eye box like you have on the AtacR. That being said, at 100 yards, you have about 100 feet field of view 100-foot field of view with the NX8. With AtacR, you have about a 93-foot field of view. In talking about the reticles, I use the FCDMX reticle in both of these scopes. Reason being is there's a lot of points of aim. It's a mill scope or mill reticle, and there's a lot, the tree has a lot of different points of aim in it. A lot of times when you get a BDC reticle or like a wind value reticle in an LPVO setting, there's a lot of empty space out there, and you end up having to use somewhat of a Kentucky windage between points of aim in the scope. The reticle that is in these scopes is very detailed, and being from Texas, we shoot typically further distances and in a lot of wind than most other parts of the country. So it's very important to me to be able to aim at very precise places or very precise points when I'm shooting 400, 500, 600 yards. Sometimes the difference in a 15, 20 mile an hour wind, I need to be able to aim at very small spots and know the value of what I'm holding exactly. When you're ordering these two scopes, they're different options. So you can get exposed turret options or capped turret options. When I order mine, I get the capped turret options. The reason being is that being an LPVO and the distances that I'll likely be shooting these, I'm not going to be dialing for elevation or wind. I'm just going to use the reticle, which is another reason why it is very advantageous to have a very detailed reticle. So moving forward, like I said in the beginning, I believed I was going to be starting with the NX8, switching to the AtacR, and likely be using the AtacR in the future for most, if not all, matches. Now, after learning everything that I have about these two scopes, I'm probably going to be sticking with the NX8 for the tactical games competitions. The reason being is the slight difference in the eye box doesn't bother me. I've never really had any trouble finding the eye box. I do like the bigger field of view that's down there, so I can see if shooting long range, you can see a bigger picture, so you can see possibly the next target that you're going to be transitioning to. While if you pull a good shot, you can transition over a little bit faster. The scope is lighter, it's smaller, so if we end up having to carry the gun any distance, I'm not having to carry any extra weight, and it feels as if the center of gravity on the rifle is a little bit lower. And you can hold the rifle, it makes you feel like, whether you can or not, I don't know, but it makes you feel like you can hold the rifle a little bit more steady. Where I will be using the AtacR is in action shooting matches. It sounds a little bit counterintuitive that you'd be utilizing a scope with a slightly smaller field of view in an action shooting match. However, the benefit of a large eye box, I think, outweighs the 6 or 7 feet that you're giving up at 100 yards, and that when you are running quickly down a trail, transitioning from target to target, a lot of times the rifle isn't in an awesome spot on your shoulder, and you're not able to get a really nice cheek weld and look, and you're kind of, the butt of the rifle's kind of floating around a little bit as you're shooting, and I think it's going to be easier to find targets in this scope. So to quickly put everything together that we've gone over, the NX8 is going to be smaller, shorter, lighter. You're going to be giving up a little bit of eye box, but gaining some field of view. With the AtacR, you are getting a scope that is described as a tank. You have a bigger eye box. You're going to give up a little bit of field of view, and you're going to get a little bit more light transmission and a little bit better picture through the optic. However, either of these scopes are going to be great options for just about anything that you're going to do. I think the price difference is $500, $600, $700 between the two. Really what I think that it would come down to is if you're a person that really struggles finding an eye box and you need the most generous eye box you can get, maybe the AtacR is for you. If you are going to be using this scope for work, where your life depends on how rugged this scope can be, get the tank, obviously. However, if you're using this scope for action shooting matches, for the tactical games, like the sniper challenge that's coming up, I believe that the NX8 will probably serve you the best. Most importantly, whichever one you choose, make sure that you use a quality inch-pound wrench to torque down the screws and the bolts to the correct torque values. It is 25 inch-pounds for the rings and 25 inch-pounds for the rings and 100 inch-pounds for the mount. Other than that, if you have any questions or comments and I haven't covered anything, you can go ahead and put it in the comments and I will do my best to answer you as soon as I can.